Okay. So I'm just in my DPL directory. I'm going to make a directory week 4. CD into that. I'm just going to create like a Ruby tutorial.rb. So this is going to be a Ruby file. So to do a Ruby file, we end it with the .rb extension. I can just go ahead and open this up in code. Okay. So like I said, I think we can use this largely as a little bit of like just a basics of coding review, but we're going to do it in Ruby. So first thing I want to kind of talk about is like variables and data types. So, you know, well, first of all, notice these pound signs. This is a comment. You know, JavaScript has comments, it's just with the backslash. So variables and data. Sorry. So with Ruby, we have some basic, and I'm going to say data types. We have some basic data types. So in JS, we have numbers. In Ruby, we have integers and floats. Let's kind of talk about the difference. So I could do, and if we want to do like a console.log, we do it with a puts. This is like a console.log. Hello. And I'm going to also go ahead and open up my terminal. To run a Ruby file, we type Ruby, and then the name, make sure you save, and then the name of the file. And there we go. We're putting out hello. And I'll say up here, you know, to run a Ruby file, we do Ruby and then file name. All right. So so far there's nothing in it other than like the way you do it, nothing different between Ruby and Rails. But when we get to data types, now we do see a little bit of a distinction. You know, in JavaScript, it's just numbers, but in Ruby, they make the distinction between integers and floats. So I can do a puts, you know, 4 divided by 2. Everyone knows what that's going to be, right? That's 2. I can do a 3 divided by 2. That's 1.5, right? Let's see. That is 1. I think I briefly showed you this, I think, when we were starting the code. But notice I'm doing integer division. Like, so Ruby is treating this as integer division. So 3 divided by 2 is technically 1.5, but 1.5 is a float. So what happens is Ruby just chops off the decimal place because it's an integer. So if I want to do decimal division, I need to do like a float divided by a thing. Something also to note in Ruby, everything is an object. I'm going to put this in quotes. Don't get this confused with the JavaScript objects. This is not the same as a JS object. Okay. They just use the same word. What it really means, everything's an object, is like everything, because we learned about object-oriented programming in classes. What it means that everything is an object, it means like everything comes from a class, you know, and has methods associated with it. So everything in Ruby, I can call like the class method on it. Okay. That is a integer. Also, everything in Ruby has like this methods method that lists all of these methods. Like $1.infinite is one infinite. So I'm going to do this methods. Now this shows all methods can call on the object. So yeah, like if I did like is one positive, question mark, that's true, right? That makes sense. You know, you could never do something like this in JavaScript where it's like one dot positive. Just numbers in JavaScript are called primitive types. They don't have any, they're just simple. They don't have any methods associated with them. But in Ruby, everything is an object. Cool. So let's look at some other classes. So I can do like just to show you, puts one.o .class. Let's just kind of start doing some of these. We have strings in Ruby. We have arrays in Ruby. This might make me make a new. We'll see what this is. Let's see what this thing is right here with the colon in front of it. What other types could I do? Oh, we could do like a puts true dot class. Puts nil dot class. So let's just kind of look at some of these basic data types. So this is a float. A float. This is something that's new. This is a symbol. Like loosely think of this as like a const. It's not a const, but you can kind of loosely think of this as like being like a string that is a const. That's not quite true though. It's a good way to think about it though. This is just like a constant string. It's called a symbol. All right. You know, we have Booleans. I mean, technically this is like the true class. You know, it's really their form of Boolean. If I do a nil, that was nil class. So in JavaScript, it's null. In Ruby, we have nil. We have arrays. It doesn't quite let me do it like this. I need to store this to a variable. So I need to do like a, and with Ruby, we don't need to declare anything. We don't use like let or const. We just say like the variable name. But let's see what X is. What, because that looks like a JavaScript object, right? In JavaScript, I'd be like, oh, that's an object. What is it in Ruby? This is called a hash. And think of a hash really as like a key. This is like a key value pair store. All languages are gonna like have these. They might call it an object, they might call it a hash, some call them dictionaries. But cool. So there's our types. Nothing too crazy there. Let's go on and talk about variables. Variables. So like with variables, don't need, like let or const or any pre-pending thing. With Ruby, we just say like the variable name, age. I'm going to say this in Ruby is convention to do snake case. Not camel case. So that's snake case. This is camel case. So camel case, you start with the lowercase letter. And if there's a different word, you do a capital letter to show that this is two words. With Ruby, you use an underscore and keep everything lowercase. So we have some different kinds of variables. This would be a local variable. Kind of see some of the difference. We have a instance variable. How we do an instance variable is with the @ sign. So yo, or let's just call it foo. We can also do constants. Constants start with a capital letter. Like pi. They all don't need to be capitalized. It's just if the first word in your letter in your word starts with a capital letter, that is a const. There's also a global variable, starts with a $. We're not going to use these. It's the reason why we don't, let me just kind of give why it's generally, I mean, they're there, you can use them. It's not like a firm rule, don't ever use them. We're not going to use them. The reason we don't want to, or we avoid using global variables and why they're kind of just not used in general is there's the potential for, I have a global variable called my age. And then, because that's going to be visible to all of my program. And then someone else declares a global variable called my age in some other file. So which one do I use? So we get into these conflicts. And you started to see how often we reuse names, right? Part of the reason there's like these scoping rules, like where things are visible, is to really allow us to reuse variable names, but not have them be the same thing. So yeah, I just want to show you that's how you do a global variable. We're not ever going to use them though. Okay. So to really kind of see the difference, well, let's do this. Let's just, like as we normally would, we can put, all of these. I'm going to get rid of this. It's my age. at foo, no surprise here, right? Let's just kind of show, I think we kind of want to see this. Let's do puts pi, and then let's do pi equals pizza, and puts pi, and puts this one. Really, the thing I want to show here, I don't think there's going to be any surprise other than maybe what happens with this constant. So let's look at what happens with constants. And I get, well, this was actually an error because I had a typo. Notice how I don't get an error. It doesn't break, just gives me a warning. So that's a little different than JavaScript. Doesn't break, gives me a warning. Like it changes pi to be pizza. So I can reassign a const, but it will give me a warning. Cool. So let's talk about, well, what's the difference between like this instance variable and a local variable? Let's do this. Let's do puts. I really need to talk about functions now to talk about this. So functions in Ruby, we use the def keyword and we give it the name. So I'm going to call this test scope. And then we can write our code in here. So in here, I'm going to try to access my variables. So there's my age. There's at foo. Let's do pi. And let's do this one. So I'm going to run this. And let me also comment out these ones. I'm just going to do a whole big. Oh, wait, I need these variables. Crap. Let's do that one, and that one, and that one. Okay, so I'm going to run this. Okay. First of all, why is this not running? I have all my variables commented out. There's my function.
You need to call the function.
Yes, exactly. I need to call the function. That's the same with every language. With the Ruby, I can do this. So we're going to also, this is a big difference between Ruby and JavaScript. I can call the function. Well, I get an error. So notice how line 55, I get this error. This isn't like, this wouldn't happen in JavaScript. I get this undefined local variable error. So, isn't that copying that whole thing? So this is undefined local variables. Variables are not scoped to the function. They're not scoped within a function, I should say. That breaks. Let's try all the other ones. This is scoped. So I'm just going to say this works, i.e. is scoped. So when I say scope, I could also kind of say it's like visible. Does this word scope? It's not scoped to the function. It's not visible to the function. It's not defined in the function. So looking back at these, instance variables are going to be scoped to the file, or if it's a class, it's going to be scoped to the class. Local variables are just scoped like at, you know, the level in the file. Like this my age is going to be scoped, you know, in this level. I could use it in if else statements, but I can't use it in functions. Consts are going to be scoped to the file class. Global ones are going to be scoped to like the project. So once again, that's kind of why they're bad. Because there's a lot of potential for reusing them. A better way, it's not to say you might want to use like this global variable that you use throughout your app. Be better to do it as a const and like import it and export it. So that's the better way to do it. We'll kind of, maybe when we do some styling stuff in JavaScript, we'll kind of look at like that kind of idea of like, oh, let's declare a const. That's a constant variable, and then import it and export it to different files. Cool. So yeah, these all worked. Cool. What if I want to use my age? Oh wait, let me show you this. So this, call the function. Let me just show you this one too, just because this is a big difference between Ruby and JavaScript. This also calls the function. You see that? I don't even need to put the parentheses. It's a really big difference. It's actually, it kind of makes JavaScript in my mind. I like Java, like, I kind of don't like how this calls the function. Because then how, like in JavaScript, we pass functions to functions all the time, right? With this, I can't pass a function like this to a function because it's going to call it. So I can't just easily pass it to a function like I do in JavaScript. There's other ways to do it that were in Ruby that we're not going to talk about, but this is like a huge difference. So in JavaScript, this would not call the function. It'd just be like like a reference to the function. In Ruby, it does call the function. Cool. What if I do want to use this my age variable in a function? How would I do that?
You would define that variable in the function.
What if it's defined outside of the function? And it needs to be defined outside the function. And I want to use it in the function.
Could you feed it as a parameter like in JavaScript?
Exactly. Just write a function that takes a parameter. And then I can use it in that function. So I have a function that can take some parameter, and then I can put it out, and then I can call my test scope, and I can pass it my local variable. And then I can use that local variable within that function. It's kind of like a little bit of a like, you're probably like, maybe some of you were stumped by that at first, but then once you see it, it's like, oh yeah, duh, right? So much, it's like so much of the things in coding, it's like, I think the answers are sometimes almost so simple, it's confusing. So cool. So yeah, and like with Ruby, this is how I can define a function. I can give it parameters. And then here I can use them. So test scope now takes it has two parameters in the definition. When I call it, I give it two arguments. So that's kind of like the different lingo. When I call a function, I actually give them the arguments, which are the actual values. When I define a function, I define these parameters, which are kind of placeholders and like those local variables for like the within the function. And right, if I do like a puts x, or like I do like a, you know, whatever, yo equals t, should be no surprise that like first of all, x is not going to be defined here, right? That these parameters are only defined in the function. Likewise, if I define a variable in a function, like that's an error. This is going to be an error. Just make sure, just to prove it to you. That's an error. What if I do this? Let's say I do an instance variable. Yo. Let's just call this at defined in function. Just trying to see if these work. So we'll put this one out. That one works. So if I define an instance variable in a function, now it's scoped to the file. Let's do it. Constant. See, this is a constant just because it starts with a capital D. Dynamic, yeah, it doesn't like that. So that does not work. I don't even think it like lets me do it. Yeah, this like can't even do that here. Like can't declare a const in a function. Which that doesn't really make sense to declare a const in a function with Ruby. But an instance variable, we'll see this in Rails where we'll just define a const in a function and then we'll just use it everywhere. So it's going to be visible to the file. So with Ruby, we're mainly going to be seeing instance variables and local variables. We honestly won't use constants that much. Cool. Questions on functions? Right, there's a little of these like kind of differences, right? These like a little bit of these rules that like Ruby is behaving a little different than JavaScript, right? But it's more or less, it's like they're more similar, right? There's just a little like, so once you learn one language, learning other languages is like, it's so much more quicker because they are so similar. You know, it's like, I feel it's like, I used to work at like an Italian restaurant and it's like, I feel like there's like a lot of Italians working there and then like a lot of people who spoke Spanish, and like Italian and Spanish were like similar enough where they could like almost like communicate. Obviously they're two different languages, but it's like, it's not like if you have someone who speaks English and speaks Chinese, there's like no similarities between those two languages. But most languages, they're going to be like, they're going to be more similar than different. Cool. Just like even with Rails, we're not going to use that many if else, but just a basic if else. If, you know, let's say I have some like, we'll just use my age again. So like if that my age is greater than, you know, some number else, and so that is like the if else statement. Oh, I want to say one more thing, one more important thing about functions. And that is in, let's talk about like return. Okay. So I have some function, let's do our add. That takes num1, num2, and n1 plus n2. And we could say sum equals add n1, n2. Puts sum, or like, yeah, put sum. This is JavaScript. What would you expect this to log?
Probably undefined.
Undefined because I don't use the return keyword. That's what I'd expected. I mean, I know this syntax is different, but yeah, I kind of expect that to be undefined. Oh, why is that not an error? Oh, because I didn't save it. First of all, it shouldn't be n1 plus n2. Those are not defined variables. So let's just do 1 and 2. Let's do 2 and 2. So it's 4. Cool. This works. So in Ruby, returns in Ruby are, or I should say this, the last line in Ruby of a function is implicitly returned. Whatever the last line evaluates to is going to be returned from the function. I don't need to use the return keyword unless I don't want the last thing in my function to be returned. What would be an example of that? Why isn't it always going to be the last thing in my function? No, I mean, what if I had like a calc function that takes 2 numbers and then some like operation? So then I could do an if statement, like if operation equals, plus. Now let's do an else if. Ruby likes to like shorthand everything. So it's like they just remove the E. So you save you 1 letter of typing. I can do an else if op equals like a minus else. Let's just do like times. So let's look at this. So if I'm doing something like this, then I do need the return keyword. But technically, I don't need it here if I was just doing like, if that was my last operation. You see why I would need it here and there and not need it there? Because if I don't get a plus or minus, then I'm going to just default to division. This will implicitly return this last thing. I mean, I could throw it in here. Actually, you know what? Do I need it here? This is like a good little question. Do I actually need, if I'm telling you Ruby's going to return the last line of code that it executes from a function, do I need the return keyword here?
No, because it'll just stop after the first if statement, if that's true.
Yeah, I don't need it there because if this is true, because this is an if statement. So only one of these lines is going to get run. If this is true, it's going to run this one and it's going to stop the if else statement, even if I don't have the return there. If I do it like this, this is like a very good kind of going like a distinction between like these if else statements. if I do it like this, then do I need the return? Or let's be lazy coders and let's put the returns only where we have to. And I'm telling you, Ruby's going to implicitly return the last line. And don't think of the last line as always being like the last line in the function. It's going to be the last line it executes. So with an if else statement, only one of these is ever going to run. That's just how if else statements work. It doesn't check any of the other operations. But if I do it like this, where I'm using if statements, two if statements, then these could potentially, I mean, I know in this example, I can't really have the operation be the both, but Ruby doesn't know that. Ruby's going to run both of these. And it's also going to do this encode. So this one, I would need a return here, and I would need a return there to tell Ruby to stop running the code. Like, especially when like you're learning how to code, I hate how Ruby, the implicit return with Ruby. I mean, it's because I think it does make, I don't know, maybe I'm just used to, I like the return word because it like, when I see return, I know it's returning. It's a little harder to tell here in this case. I think it's a little, I actually think by removing the return word, it makes it harder to read. You can always add it. It's not going to hurt anything if you have this return keyword in your functions, if that's more readable to you. I'm going to leave this as is to kind of show you where we have to have them. So that's a good little review of if-else statements, returns, and functions. Kind of connecting some dots. You know, we also have ternaries in Ruby, like, but they're the exact same. Like I could say like, you know, is odd equal to Ruby. Actually, here's something. Ruby has a nice little method on numbers called odd. So I can do it ternary. Let me tell you this. Okay, so this is a little like, why is there a question mark here and a question mark there? Kind of see that double question mark. It is a convention in Ruby that if a function returns a Boolean, that it ends with a question mark. And that makes the code nicer because now I can read this 2.odd question mark. I'm like, oh, odd question mark returns a Boolean. It's either going to be true or false. So it's nice because it makes your code more readable. So if I had no idea, if it was like X question mark, I could have no idea what this X is, but I'd be like, ooh, it's going to be a Boolean. Cool. Does everyone know what I mean when I'm saying this word convention? It's like, you don't have to do it. It's not gonna, I could go in and write a function called odd and it can return true or false. It's not, it doesn't mean it's not like a rule that's going to like break your code. It's a convention that Ruby developers follow so we can all be on the same page. It's kind of the same thing with like when I was talking about the variables. You can do camel case in Ruby. It works. That's like a camel case. That's a very valid variable name in Ruby. It's just not the convention. So Cool. Let's see here. Let's talk about arrays really quick. Arrays are, I really think we can kind of just treat arrays as the same. Ruby has like some a little differences, but they're really like different methods, but otherwise I just like nums 1, 2, 3, 4. Do like a nums dot push or like 5. I can't do like, you know, the spread operator. That's kind of like a JavaScript thing. So that's a little sad, but there's ways to clone arrays. We're not going to do too much with arrays. But you know, we do have like methods like nums.last. Where's this unexpected inputs line 109? Oh, I have an extra end right there. Nums.push 5. Wait, why is that not? Oh, I didn't put this. So Ruby gives us like these nice methods like first and last. You know, we don't have those methods in JavaScript, but we could still also just do like a index them to grab the last one or the first one. You might see this, like Ruby's going to have like, Ruby is just going to in general have like more what is called like syntax sugar. Like it's got this nice syntax. It's got a lot of these shortcuts. It's got like more like helper methods. So this is another way to do a push. It's like, I don't know why we need these different ways, but it's cool. Ruby will have like a lot of methods that like do the exact same thing. So, we do have things like while loops and for loops and each. Like Ruby has its own flavor of like each and map and filter and reduce. If I wanted to do a nums.map, this is how I do it. I can't give it that because of how functions work in Ruby. The big difference here is I'm not giving it a function. I give it what's called like a proc or a block. This is a block, but it looks exactly, it's kind of, you can think of it just as like a function. So what does map do? This is the same thing in JavaScript. Nums is going, like map is going to go through each thing in an array. It's going to perform a operation and it's going to return that thing and plop that into a new array. So let yo equal nums. I'm not going to use return for this. This is where I actually don't want to, I don't want to use return in a proc. I'm just going to return because I have to return something. So there we go. And then I could do a puts yo. What do you think yo is going to be?
Probably an array with all the +2 added to each
Yeah.
number in the
Yeah,
array.
times 2. So
Oh, ×2, yeah.
oh, and I use let. I do that all the time, right? JavaScript and Ruby. Yeah. A little different. I don't give it because of how Ruby handles this. Like I can't pass a function to the map. I give it a block. There's also something. So this is like, we're going to see with a block. You can kind of think of it like, think of a block as a function. Once again, this is not quite accurate, but I think we're not going too much into this, so we could do it with a what's called a proc as a one line. There are like some differences, but like I said, I just kind of want you to see the syntax. So let's do a filter. Well, let me do this. Let me do the same thing with the map, with the proc. It just has this syntax. I use the curly brackets, and then I give it a placeholder to the thing. And then I can perform my function. So that would be another way I can map through my array of numbers and get a new array with all the numbers doubled. I need to call that X because that's what I called it there in the pipes. And there we go. We're not going to be doing loops in Ruby with the Rails for now. The Ruby in Rails is going to be like dead simple. So we do have things like map, we have filter. There's actually another one. I think it's select actually. It's like JavaScript's filter. We just call it select. There's reduce. So I want to talk about hashes and classes though, and then we'll get into Rails. So once again, a hash, we have what's a hash in Ruby? Just key value pair store. So how I define it is I could just do like let's just say person. And let me show you the old way. Because you'll see this, you'll kind of like see these in logs where you have this like arrow hash rocket syntax. Yeah. So remember, this is a symbol. This type of data is a symbol. So in Ruby, the key can be any type. That's kind of new. You know, I could have them be a symbol. I could have it be a string. So to access a thing in a hash, I do the I just do bracket notation. So if I have a symbol, I can just do puts person.name. Or if I have a number, puts 1 to grab the value, or I could do let's actually do our nums here and our Spanish. Oh wait, I need to do hola. And there we go. So you know, this would give us George. This would give us 1. This would give us hello. So yeah, in Ruby, the key can be any type. The most common type you'll see will be a symbol. Will be this way. There is a shorthand of doing this. It's going to make it look a lot like a JavaScript object, which is nice. Let's person one. If I do person one dot name, like we would in JavaScript, that is an error. It's okay, there's not a name method. There are methods on this because person one, if I did person one class, that's going to be a hash. And if I look at the methods on hash, I can call that. So sorry, let me do this. Name is an error, but I can still do like, I can still call like methods because everything in Ruby is an object. So there's all these methods on, hashes I have. So I could do like, does it has key name? Forget if I do this as a symbol or a string. I thought it had that method. Oh, it's probably a question mark because it's a Boolean. Yeah, see, it even gave me that hint. Did you mean has key question mark? Oh, I don't want to touch that. I want to run that. And that would be because it has this person one has the key name. Let me also see. Let's see if we can access it by a string. And so notice how there's a blank. If I do just a P, that will give me more information. That is nil. See, if I try to access by the string name, it's not going to find it. If I do it by the symbol name, it'll find it. So this can sometimes, like when you're using a third-party thing and like you're so used to using symbols, but then they're using like a string and you're like, why isn't this working? So just pay attention. It can be a little subtle difference. Like I think can get you hung up. But for rels and for like this first week, we're going to do it. We're going to see them like this. Just like we would in JavaScript. But just remember, like you're going to see like in logs, you might see this syntax. We have a hash that has a symbol as the key and then whatever the type is as the value. Cool. Yeah, I'm skipping through some stuff. I just want to talk about classes. Just do a brief like classes in Ruby, because we're going to be using classes a lot. Like we kind of saw that on Friday. It's just a lot of classes. So let's say I have a class animal. This is how I do a class in Ruby. This was kind of the example I used last week. Like an animal can breathe. I am performing of breath, like, right? That's like a pretty cool function to be able to breathe. Like there's a lot of stuff going on in breathing. Like also if you're an animal, you can like, be heart. There's kind of like this interesting thing where like mammals, doesn't matter the size, but like kind of like a loose rule, you all get the same amount of heartbeats. So, but right, these would be like, I kind of want like this. There's a lot going on. I mean, I'm just like returning these strings, but there's a lot going on with these functions, right? I kind of want to use this analogy because when we use rels, there's going to be these functions we're using that are defined for us that are doing a lot behind the scenes. And we might not know how it works. You probably don't have a clue, like really might not have a clue how breathing works, but you can do it. You just kind of like get that magical ability to breathe because you are a human and you inherit from animal because you are an animal. I always think it's funny how people don't think they're animals, but they very much are. So now I can create a new animals. So I can, or new human, I can say like, you know, me, James equals human dot new. And then I can breathe. Did I do this the wrong way? Oh, class. So a class animal, not a function. So we're going to be doing a lot of inheritance with rels. We're going to create a lot of models that just inherit from active record. And then we're going to get all this magic. Like we're just going to be able to breathe. We're going to be able to have a heartbeat. We're going to be able to interact with our database without having to do any work. I kind of want to talk about the difference just to reiterate, because this is also important. What is called a class? Okay, so these are all, let me just say this. These are all instant methods. Instance methods called on instance. Right? And like the animal class, like it's an animal class, like an animal class doesn't breathe, right? It's a specific thing, instance of a animal that breathes. Right? You as a individual breathe, a bird as an individual animal breathes. So that's what I mean by instance method. There's also class methods. I define a class method by using this self keyword. I don't really know what it means for like the animal class as a whole to breathe. Does that make sense to anyone? What would it mean? I'm trying to think if I can like make this analogy. Breathe. I don't know. Like it doesn't really, I can't really. Let's do like an about. I don't know. Or let's just do, trying to think of an animal method. I could do like an about. Puts, I don't know how many animals there are in the world, but there are probably like trillions of animals. Or I could do breathe. Let's do breathe. And I could just say, because this is about all the animals. So I could say like all animals breathe. Right? There's not an animal that doesn't breathe. So if I use the self keyword, this is a class method. The difference is, so I call that method on the class. It just says all animals breathe. Something like that. So that's a class method. Let's maybe look at like an instance variable. So I can have an instance variable in a class. So now if I want to, now I could use that. Yeah, let's do it right here. I could interpolate it. So here's how I interpolate in Ruby. With JavaScript, I use backticks and a $sign. With Ruby, I need to use double quotes and then can do a pound and then quotes or curly brackets. So I can have instance variables that are going to be defined in all of my, I don't want to put this here. They're going to be defined in all of my classes. Doesn't seem like that is putting that. But okay, there's gonna, I can't show it like this. I don't want to get into constructors because we're not going to see constructors. We'll look at this in Rails. Let's kind of ignore that for now. We're going to take a more in-depth look at classes later. I kind of just want to show you some other things. So we'll look at instance variables in Rails because we'll definitely be using them. I can also do like a private section. We'll see this. This could like return some password. So I could use this in my function. I'm just doing interpolation. So I'm going to call a function that's underneath the private. So these are only callable in class. What does that mean? Let's look at that. Okay, I'm performing the miracle of breath, and then I get my password. So I can have a function that's private. It's only callable in the class. So if I try to do James.password outside the class, it's saying, hey, you can't do that. That's a private method. So I can't call it outside of the class. Here. Okay, so I'm going to slack this whole out. I know this is quite a bit. But even this, for what we're using, this is like, we don't even need to know this much for Rails, for the basic stuff we're going to be doing with Rails. So I wanted to give you a brief intro into Ruby. And we'll look at classes more when we get to Rails, but that is kind of the 1+ hour demo of Ruby. I think sometimes it can be like seeing a different language. It can, even though it's different, I think it can really, it can make you like a better developer because you see something done a different way and it might be like, oh, okay. Kind of makes that concept a little more clear. Cool. Any questions with this? Sweet. Let's take a break. And what time is it? Let's come back at, let's do 10:55. Give you 15 minutes.